And joining us now to discuss President Trump's trade negotiations with the EU is Mike Leon, NTD News contributor and the host of the Can We Please Talk podcast, as well as Michael Busler, professor of finance at Stockton University. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this Monday morning, Memorial Day. Mike Leon, starting with you, President Trump is taking a different approach with Europe than his predecessors. What are your thoughts?
Hey, Kerry, good to see you. And Mike, good to see you as well. Happy Memorial Day to everybody out there. So, look, I think the same thing that I always think, Kerry. As I've been saying from the beginning, and again, I've spoken to so many people, not only that formerly worked in Trump 1.0 administration, but covered the Treasury Secretary as well. It's this negotiation aspect of this, right? Like, we can get into the nuance of how we execute these negotiations, but he's always looked at tariffs as a negotiating ploy. So I know it's creating market instability. And I know, one day on a Friday, he's announcing that it's going to be 50% on this date. And then all of a sudden by the weekend, now we're extending it to July 9th. And that creates volatility. But it's the same song and dance with respect to repeating. And the ultimate goal is what happened with the UK and Britain, right? In terms of creating a deal that he feels is fair for the American worker and is fair with respect to what we do manufacture from these places. So what I look at it is just the same thing as always happening, Kerry, right? Like he puts the tariff on for a date, it gets pushed to maybe 90-day extension, and then we figure out what's going to be the negotiating tactics of both sides, because we do import a lot of medicinal and pharmaceutical goods from the EU, and that's going to be a huge makeup that we're going to have to find somewhere else, and that industry is going to have to make that up somewhere else if this goes into effect on July 9th. So it's kind of the same thing. We're back where we started once again, Kerry.
And Michael Busler, your thoughts on Trump's negotiating style?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I agree with Mike. So President Trump announced on April 2nd that tariffs are going to go into effect virtually for everybody within 90 days. And the tariffs he announced would have been fairly high. The purpose of saying that is to create a sense of urgency so that people will come to the bargaining table as the UK did and come up with an agreement that they both can live with. Well, he said on April 2nd, 45, 50 days go by and the European Union isn't doing anything. So again, he wants to create that sense of urgency. So he says, look, if we don't have an agreement, I'm going to put 50% tariffs, which would crush the European economy. One advantage we have, since we have this negative balance of trade, we buy so much more from them than they buy from us. If a 50% tariff would crush their economy. So he said, I'm going to put that on in a matter of days. All of a sudden, the European Union says, well, wait a minute, don't do that. We are going to negotiate. So when the European Union contacted Trump, he said, okay, I'll give you some time. How much time do you need? And they said, well, give us a month, 5 weeks till July 9th, and we'll be able to come up with something. The overall goal is to reach tariff agreements, which were very similar to what the UK did. A 10% tariff, and they'll talk about certain key industries and what exceptions you have to have. But the European Union wasn't coming to the bargaining table. So to create that sense of urgency, he said, I'm going to put a 50% tariff on. That brought them to the table immediately. I have a feeling by July 9th, you'll end up with an agreement with the European Union very similar to what the UK did. Part of the problem with the European Union is there's, I think, 27 countries in the European Union. Germany and France are ready to make deals, but they have to go through Brussels. So that's a little more complicated, but still Trump wants this wrapped up as soon as possible, and that's what these threat of higher tariffs will do.
And that's a great segue over to you, Mike Leon. My next question was very much what Michael was just describing, the complexity of the EU. How do you view what has to happen under that umbrella of over 20 countries to get their house in order to be able to negotiate in earnest with Besant and Trump?
Yeah, and I think Mike summarized it great, and that's why I love talking to subject matter experts on my show about this stuff, because it's right. There is a complexity in it, right? You can't, when people don't forget about Brexit and people don't maybe follow geopolitical news or global affairs and realize that the Britain and the UK are no longer part of the European Union, as they voted on that years ago. And so now the European Union represents 27 or so countries that are all aligned in an interest of creating trade deals and proposals that all fit within the 27 country scheme. So it's incredibly hard and challenging. And like I said, I get the overarching premise, and I'm sure Michael agrees with the overarching premise with respect to tariff negotiation and not so much resetting the global trade market, Kerry, but more so resetting industries in the U.S. and sparking industries in the U.S. that have been dormant for decades, or at least don't do as much from a production standpoint anymore, and potentially bringing those jobs back. Like, I get that. The problem is that it's the style, right? And it's what it's doing to create instability. And the secondary we've talked about on this show and with this panel, respectively, has been about the secondary effects of this, right? People think, well, this is going to be higher. This is going to cost me more. No, but this may cost people jobs, because what happens is other industries are going to be affected by this. So there's so much complexities and nuance with respect to not only what tariffs do, but with respect to your question, Kerry, about the European Union. It is incredibly complex. And what Michael was saying is actually right. You do want to create an urgency, because you have to negotiate with 27 or so countries. He gave them 90 days, and they hadn't really done much with respect to having their talks in Brussels and saying, how are we going to counter the U.S.'s proposal here? So the president is, and I kind of agree with him on this part, creating a sense of urgency, saying, look, you have until July 9th. That was actually, by the way, already built in. If you recall, I think was already built into the deal where they could have this extension up until July 9th. But he didn't want to do that because he wants to create the urgency, because he knows this is such a large undertaking because they represent so many countries as part of the EU.
And Michael Busler, Trump last week, when he was bringing them to the table through his threat, he said that the EU was formed to take advantage of the U.S. Can you explain whether you agree or not with that, or what potentially Trump was alluding to in its formation?
So the idea with the European Union was to create kind of a common market within Europe and a common currency. So trade within the countries of the European Union would work fairly easily. But when they did that, they put tariffs on the U.S. and other countries as somewhat of a protectionist to keep the European Union going. So I agree with him in principle that the European Union ended up hurting the U.S., and now we have to negotiate all these complex deals. The reason they're so complex is, look, everybody's going to end up agreeing to a 10% tariff. It's the exceptions that will vary by country. For instance, the U.S. wants to bring back goods that affect national security, steel, aluminum, copper, medical supplies. So even with a 10% tariff on virtually everything, Trump will want a 25% tariff on those goods so that we can bring production back to the U.S. Well, each one of the European countries has certain things that they produce and they want to keep producing in their country. So the 10% will come about, but each of the 27 countries are going to ask for some exceptions. This is a very complex, as Mike correctly pointed out, this is a very complex negotiation. I hope they can do it in the next 5 weeks. But I agree with Trump. The European Union did hurt the U.S. manufacturers in that the U.S. manufacturers were not able to sell their products in the European Union. The overall goal of all this tariff policy is to open up foreign markets to U.S. manufacturers. Once that happens, we'll see a boom in U.S. manufacturers selling to other countries, and that will eliminate this negative balance of trade, which is the whole goal of this policy.
And as you allude to onshoring for national security purposes, as well as giving U.S. businesses access to foreign markets, Mike Leon, I want to pivot with you and discuss Putin's latest attack, Trump strongly rebuking Putin. It seems like Putin and his allies in Beijing are suggesting maybe they have more to gain through war than peace. I'd love to get your comments on that in particular as it relates to staying with the EU.
Kerry, you and Steph in the back and forth were talking about the men and women who made sacrifices, right? And obviously, the people that were killed in these drone strikes and the people that have been killed throughout this 3-year war, our hearts go out to all of them. And This is part of what was being talked about on the campaign trail, right? Russia and Putin's aggression. Russia invaded Ukraine. We have to start with a common baseline premise. The fact that this is finally dawning on the president, that a former KGB officer who's now president of the United States, who's had political enemies potentially killed in certain instances, a rival killed as well in Navalny, and there's been documentaries done about him. All of this has to be treated with Russia being the aggressor in all of this. And I will echo something that a global correspondent once said on my show recently about this entire conflict, is that as Trump comes into office, he realizes that while he has so much leverage over the Ukrainians with respect to military aid, et cetera, he has almost no usable leverage over the Russians. I mean, this is a nuclear superpower. This is a large military. This country already has a relationship, like you mentioned, Kerry, with China. So, sending ground troops and things like that are non-starters. And he has no leverage except one, which would be to sanction Russian oil and gas. But that will send the economy in an even worse direction. And I hate even laughing about this because we're showing pictures and images of the damage that has been done in this war. And so, look, putting stuff on True Social and saying Putin is a killer. I mean, I guess thanks for coming to the realization, like we all have in the global community, about what Vladimir Putin has done and what he wants to do in his ultimate goal to reunify the Soviet Union. But I think the biggest thing right now would be if the president's watching this and listening to this, or people in his circle, it truly is time to start treating this relationship like it is, right? It's for all intent and purpose, the big brother picking on the little brother, and the big brother has way more weapons and is doing a lot more damage, and the little brother is trying to fight for its survival. And we were helping that little brother up until recently and what happened in the Oval Office. So I hope that the president's team and Marco Rubio and those that are actually negotiating with Russian officials and Ukrainian officials, I do agree that we do need to compromise between the two of them and to try to put peace deals in place. But I will echo, in 2019, there was a peace deal put in place by Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, and that netted into what we have today, which is war and chaos happening in Ukraine. So I don't know how this ends I don't know what the end is in sight, Kerry, and I just hope for peace and an everlasting peace. But I do know that right now, President Trump needs to start treating this. And maybe he's finally opened his eyes to realizing that Vladimir Putin has been the aggressor in all of this, and we need to start treating it as such.
And Michael Busler, as we finish up, I'd like you to discuss a bit about the economic implications for both the U.S. and the EU, as if Mike's suggested sanctions are to be applied. I mean, right now, Spain and France are both buying gas products from Russia. So if sanctions do go into place, secondary sanctions on anybody buying Russian oil, and just generally, if the war should escalate, what does that mean economically for the U.S. and the EU?
So Mike made a very good point that President Trump thought when he got into office in a matter of a day, I can end this war. His assumption was that both sides want to end the war. Well, that's not the case. Putin didn't want to end the war unless he can get as much control of the Ukraine as possible. So Trump has given him some time, and I think, as to Mike's point, Trump has finally realized Putin really doesn't want peace. He wants to acquire as much property that the Soviet Union lost back. So the only way to really put any kind of pressure on Russia is economic pressure. So he'll sanction them further. It will clobber the Russian economy. The fear is, how will the Russians react to that? Are they going to get more aggressive, which is not what you hope, but you hope that they start to react more in a way that says, look, this is going to clobber our economy. We're going to have to come up with a deal that brings peace. And then we've had peace deals between Ukraine and Russia for years. In 1992, Ukraine turned over all of their nuclear weapons to Russia, and there was an agreement that there wouldn't be any conflicts between the two countries. And here we are today. You had Crimea in 2014, and here we are today. So we have to come up with an agreement that works, and it's an agreement that is enforceable. The U.S. dollar and what we call the SWIFT banking system, if they sanction Russia completely there, then Russia will have to deal with countries like China and perhaps India, which they're still selling a lot of oil to. economically, it won't hurt the U.S. that much. It will hurt Russia. And again, the fear is, how will Russia react to that?
Well, Mike Leon, Michael Busler, so much we covered and so much more that we didn't even get to. Really appreciate you joining us this morning. Wishing you both a very happy and meaningful Memorial Day.
Thank you. Always my pleasure to be here.